it is time for something even better. Are you ready, Nathan?
Ready.
Are you ready? Okay.
Well, no, really, nothing can make you ready for this show.
Not for this one. Not for this one. But in the spirit of that, welcome to another edition of Hashtag TV Guideposts, where we're going to be diving into episodes 7 and 8 of season 1 of HBO's The Leftovers. I'm wondering how many possessives I can include in this little introduction. We're going to be exploring the episodes Solace for Tired Feet and the much shorter named Cairo. Not the Cairo syrup, but as in the...
Or Cairo, Egypt.
Or Cairo, Egypt, but a place, I don't know what that voice was, but I'm here to tell you about the episodes from The Leftovers. Please.
And we're back. So episode 7.
I love how this the TV Guidepost intro. It's like it's getting more and more meta as it goes along. Where it's like you just now you really are picturing not the bygone days of ethereal piano music overlaying some meditative voice. Now it's just people hovering around a microphone and trying to use that microphone for whatever is on their mind. Anyway, so yes,
Solace for Tired Feet, episode 7. So I'm going to throw something at you here. It's nothing profound, but just an interesting observation. Sure. Overall, none of the teenager storyline stuff is great or stands out in a real profound way in the greater context of the show. But I really do love the inventiveness that they execute on the concept of the sudden departure. And what I mean by that is the prank, which is morbid, but the refrigerator prank that happens,
of course,
prank is the wrong way, but the sort of challenge, the truth or dare type of game they play, which is rooted in, they got some kid to go into it. October 13th happens. Is it 13th or 14th?
14th. It's the 14th.
14th. October 14th happens, and he departs within it. And so it becomes this weird totem of sort of cosmic influence for these kids, so I just really love that aspect of
it. As a concept, so we obviously have a certain sort of faith-based background in which conversations around the event known as the Rapture, all varieties of conversations have taken place about it. I'm not interested in the moment at those. The concept of just a vanishing is a powerful concept, and I feel like Lindelof and Perrotta are creative and inventive enough to really explore all of the different, maybe not every single facet, but there is so much baked into simply the occurrence of a vanishing that I feel like they capitalize on in some really profound ways, in some really inventive ways, like visualizing a pranked kid getting stuck in a refrigerator and they open it up and he's gone. He's not there. I mean, again, it's really powerful. The show has, I touched on a little bit last week, the show has, sort of tapped into moments like the missing bagel and Nora Durst's missing credentials and just all of these missing things that I think the show really does a great job of being creative and inventive in the way it plays around with those metaphors. And so, yeah, I find that really compelling, deeply compelling, actually.
This episode for me kind of, even though last week I said 6, 7, 8, it's more because as I watched them all in quick succession, but is forgettable is the wrong word because there's a great run with Scott Glenn at the end. But other than that, I did like the dramatic turn of Tom discovering the other, the doppelgangers of he and Christine. Like that's a really,
absolutely, yes.
You don't even have to give a ton of screen time to it, just to kind of place it there and turn the turn the show on its head a little bit, or turn those characters' journeys on their head a little bit. So that was really great.
Honestly, so this is an episode I had mentioned last week that I'm fonder of episode 6, Guest, which is like a benchmark of this season. And the episode we're going to be talking about after this is also really powerful and affecting. This episode 7, I wrote down 2 things. And the only things I wrote down were exactly what you just mentioned. I think that narrative pivot is really strong, and they do some cool things with it in the moment. It's energizing. And I like Scott Glenn. I even like Scott Glenn's character. I feel like this piece of the story so far has gone nowhere. It has created a couple of nice interactions, but I didn't have a lot this time around to really hang my thoughts on in terms of what exactly he's playing with. Scott Glenn is giving an amazing performance, and he's committing wholeheartedly. I love the way he interplays with these voices that he hears in his head. But I think I was expecting, even this time around, having already seen the show, I think I was expecting a little bit more out of this episode, because he shows up, rescues Jill from the refrigerator bit, and then I'm like, oh, yeah, that's right. We're going to start getting into his character a little bit. But then even when we get into his character a little bit, I feel like this episode sort of leaves a lot on the table in a way that that I found it difficult to sort of connect to this one. 6, in the same way that episode 4 kind of left me a little hollow following how powerful episode 3 is, I wondered if episode 7 left me a bit the same, given how much I love episode 6. Maybe that's not a fair comparison, but that's what I'm feeling.
You know, these premium style shows, and by these I mean things like this, even like a Watchmen, which is also Lindelof, but even thinking things like Game of Thrones, have develop, for whatever reason, this pattern of like big important episode in terms of maybe mythology or events that kind of have a decrescendo afterwards. So maybe I mean, that's pure speculation, but maybe that's something that's happening there. But also something I wonder about, where I haven't read the book, so I can't really speak to how much is or isn't in the original text, in the source text. But I wonder if Scott Glenn's presence in this episode specifically, because he has a decent amount of screen time late in it.
Yes.
Again, speculation. Where the show goes, where the series goes with Kevin's relationship to Patty, effectively, it's not really spoiler territory, requires a lot of buy-in as an audience member. And I just wonder, I wonder if they knew, again, not knowing what's in the book, I wonder if they knew on this back half of season 1, okay, this is roughly where we're going to aim if we come back. Like, who knows if they knew at that point. But this is roughly where we're going to aim, this dynamic. So we really have to cement what is kind of going on with Scott Glenn to illustrate the inheritance of it, that same phenomena in gosh, the actor's name just escaped me, but Kevin, Justin Theroux.
Oh,
does that make sense? Like, I just wonder if they're doing some string pulling to try to lay some mythology groundwork. I don't know. I'm just
so the theory makes sense. I would find it more easy to embrace if I did not know that by some admissions in Lindelof's interviews and stuff that he kind of approaches every season as if he's never going to get another one. And so I know that that's part of his at least announced creative process, that he does not run the 3-year game. He runs the 1-year game. And if I never get another one, I want to make sure my story is told.
Post Lost, but yes.
Yes, post Lost. Yeah, because we know what doing the long game did for him on Twitter and everything. So, so it's one of those things where knowing that about his creative process now, and also knowing about some of where season 2 and 3 go, I think it's probably more likely, and again, this is all speculation. Yours is speculation and no more or less likely than mine. I feel that in my mind, it's perhaps that he knew in developing season 2 and then ultimately in developing season 3. Because spoiler alert, if you've never watched the show, the father of Kevin Garvey becomes a very big player in season 3. Like thematically and as a character and everything. Like, his journey is substantiated a lot more. And so I feel like that probably grew out of them utilizing what was already on the table rather than them playing with the notes right now. I cannot remember the father character from the book well enough to know how much of this is substantiated. I know Kevin Garvey's character had a father who went crazy. I remember that much about the novel. But I seem to recall that in the novel, he was not the chief of police. He was the mayor or something. He was like a high political official or something. And so that piece is just kind of unknown to me. That having been said, I think Scott Glenn's performance compensates for what I would ding as narrative deficiencies in an episode like this. Scott Glenn is electric to watch. Like, he's a really he's just an engaging performer. And in this, more so than in other things I've seen him in, I like him as an actor, but I think he's particularly strong in this in a way that I think is makes it sort of worth hanging on to, but I just can't get around some of what I would consider it to be narrative deficiencies on this part. And like I said, those are the only two things that, as I was watching it, I wrote down. Again, I've been very vocal about the fact that I don't like the Holy Wayne stuff, but I do like that plot wrinkle that Tom is not a unique character in his situation. And I like Scott Glenn's performance enough and some of the interior moments of that to give it some credibility. But beyond that, I don't. This is not an episode I'm very
sure
endeared to, just in general.
And much is clear.
Wow.
Wow. Speaking of,
I'm just saying,
we're endeared to. So, Riri, I've got like, geez Louise, a normal fear. I've got episodes worth of notes on this episode, but can we start from the end?
Yeah, let's do that. And we're talking about episode 8 now, not episode 7. But yes, we're talking about episode
Cairo, 8. New York, where Kevin...
Cairo, New York.
Potato. Would spend summers or something like that. I wrote the last 10 minutes of this episode is Shakespeare. Like, it is otherworldly. I'm always so fascinated with the craft. You know, we did a whole episode last year on writing King's memoir of the craft, and you look at the things that they choose to make happen, the narrative things, the beats that have to happen in this episode, which culminates in the death of Patty. But not just the death of Patty, the suicide of Patty. And you work backwards, and the scripting magic that has to happen for me as the viewer to not feel like you to say you earned that. Does that make sense at all? Like, in other words, you can't just jump into these sorts of narrative beats. Like, the character progressions have to make some sense for these, at least in this episode, how it ends, wild choices to be made.
Yeah.
And I just am always so impressed with the craftsmanship that goes into writing characters. It reminds me of, and I referenced this on our Stephen King shorts conversations. I even think you went and found it, the one about the women driving the van to the theme park or whatever.
Yes, Herman Wouk is still alive. Yeah.
And the family, and they end up killing themselves and their kids in the back by driving off the road. And this weird thing that happened in the reading of that, which was, I understand why these characters have chosen this. And that's a really skillful thing to pull off.
Sure, absolutely.
In an episode like this one, when it gets there, you're like, bravo. I mean, that was
absolutely, in
performance and in writing, just masterful.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I feel like it's I mean, you've sung the praises of Ann Dowd before. As frequently, yes, absolutely. As frequently as she plays characters you kind of love to hate, she is an absolutely incredible performer. It's stunning what she's able to pull off in both subtle and overt ways. And that, I mean, I can't even in a conversation like this unpack some of what they discuss, because it has to be sort of experienced in that stream. So the premise of episode 8, if you're trying to keep up and kind of waiting or still listening to this segment before you actually watch it, the premise of episode 8 is the character of Patty, who is the head of this local chapter of the Guilty Remnant, and has been she and Kevin have had a frustrating sort of dynamic of interaction, because she causes him a lot of grief and frustration, but then she reached out to him for help when their member Gladys was brutally murdered. And so they've had this sort of irritating dynamic. Well, the premise of this episode would have you believe that Kevin Garvey blacked out, elicited the help of his friend. Can you call him friend? I don't know. This guy who hunts dogs and has no name and is just like a spectral figure in Kevin's life. So,
but real,
a real person. Yeah. And so, presumably Kevin blacked out, enlisted his help to kidnap Patty, tie her up in a cabin off in Cairo where they are holding her. And when they're holding her there, he says he's gonna, like, they dance back and forth with whether or not they're gonna let her go, whether they're gonna kill her, whether, all of these crazy things. And the last like 10-15 minutes of the episode, she's having this real existential and very thought-provoking conversation with him about a variety of different things. And it kind of culminates in him cutting her loose and saying that he's going to let her go and he's going to admit to what he's done. And it's at that point that he lets her go that she decides to end her life. And like you said, they had to, emotionally and narratively, they had to earn that. And I feel like the episode fully does, in a very complex way that you kind of have to endure and experience to really understand how they've done it. I had forgotten that she killed herself. I knew that she eventually died because of where I know, because I guess, mild spoiler alert, she does not leave the show. She dies, but she does not leave the show. And because of where I knew she would again appear and how I knew she would again appear, I knew that she died, but I could not remember in this moment that she took her own life until it actually happened.
That and the revelation that they staged Gladys's death.
Yes.
Or that not they staged it as in it's fake, but then they did it.
That they killed her. Yes. Which is, and it adds some new weight to that brutal moment because she's clearly in on it, but somehow loses her nerve at the end because the guilty remnant, one of their biggest aspects is that they're not supposed to speak. That having been said, for a leader of a cult who are devoted to silence, and Dad has a lot of lines in several episodes at this point. But she talks all throughout this episode. But Gladys, as she was being murdered, begged them to stop, which is again adds to the brutality of it. But finding out that they staged that death, or that they sort of ordered that death, and that now it's rooted in Patty's own sort of self-chosen martyrdom and suicide. It's really affecting. It sounds probably very grim and a bit like, why in the world would I watch a show like that? But when you hear this dialogue and you hear some of the concepts that they're playing with, it's incredible. It's really incredible.
And I feel like this episode and this scene specifically, or rather the collection of scenes between Kevin and Patty, really, really shore up why this was a valuable conversation for you and I to have on the show.
Yes.
Insofar as the things we're trying to talk about. And I while it was happening, was typing basically her final monologue when he accuses her of still like why won't you let this go, or the sudden departure. And
yes,
and she says, I think about it every waking moment. What else is there to think about?
Yeah,
it doesn't matter what happened, because he kind of challenges, do you know where they went? What happened? What do you know? She said, It doesn't matter. The difference between you and me is I accept that it did. While you push it aside and ignore it, we strip ourselves of everything that distracts us from it, that keeps us from remembering. We strip away attachment and fear and love and hatred and anger until we are erased, a blank slate. We are living reminders of what you tried desperately to forget, and we are ready and waiting.
Yeah.
It's intense. It is intense. And the two of them that's just an electric scene.
It really is. Yeah.
Otherwise, this episode's riddled with a lot of thematic stuff that, we can touch on or not. I don't know if you caught this. It's Memorial Day that they're prepping for, and this episode
I did not.
After Memorial Day, by the way.
Wow, I did not catch that.
We should have worked that out a little differently, but it's all
I didn't. Wow.
Now, I don't mean this to be a dumb question, but a couple weeks ago you said you couldn't recall what the GR's plot was. Has it resurfaced to you what's about to happen?
Not the specifics, but the generalities have. Like, because of that moment where they unload the truck
right.
of the bodies,
the loved ones, right?
Yes. So I remember something about, like, I think part of their intention, and again, the details are foggy. I watched this show once a few years ago, and now I'm catching up with it, and I'm not skipping ahead for, context or whatever. But I seem to remember somebody saying something like, when whatever their plot is divulged, I seem to remember somebody from the Guilty Remnant like writing down, like, we made them remember, or something. Like, it's kind of throwing grief in people's faces, but I don't know exactly the specifics of exactly what they're playing with. But I think it's obviously it involves that company that makes bodies of people from photographs and stuff that they've stolen, but I don't remember what their end game is, or at least what the specifics of their details are. But we'll find out next episode.
We don't rush to end game, Reed.
Nope, we don't. And I would say the compulsion is strong to want to sort of dig into some of those kinds of things. I would encourage that we hold some of that, because this is meant to just be a sort of a follow the plots.
I was just making sure I wasn't ignoring anything that I really wanted to talk about that wasn't theme.
Yeah. But next week we will be having a full conversation about season 1 of The Leftovers. We'll be covering episodes 9 and 10 in their specifics, and then having a full thematic. That will be the substance of next week. It will be an episode on season 1 of The Leftovers and all of its narrative and thematic glory. I think the only thing for me that we've missed mentioning here that I do think is pretty significant is obviously Jill's personal journey, sort of confronting Nora about the gun, finding that coming up hollow, that brutal exchange she has with her friend on the grass.
Oh gosh, that's terrible.
Brutal exchange. And then breaking into Nora's house, finding the gun, then giving up the search, only to find her way on the doorsteps of the Guilty Remnant, asking if she can stay.
What do you mean giving up the search? The search was for the gun.
Yeah, but I felt, and maybe you read it differently, I felt that she was wanting to find the gun so she could do something about that, throw it in Nora's face, confront her with it, or something like that.
I think, but to me, and this is some thematic stuff I'm trying to hold off at the moment, but to me, my understanding of that is it's less about anything that happens in light of the gun and whether the gun is still in Nora's possession, because at all.
I see. Okay.
And,
got it.
And, because this question hangs heavy over this episode and over this series, can we be okay? After trauma, you be made okay? And to Jill, she sees post Wayne hug Nora and doesn't buy it. Although, I think Nora is truthfully on a better path at this moment than she was pre-Wayne. So I do think it's real and not false. But Jill, and I think a lot about, even though I don't love later parts of the series, but in Game of Thrones, when Tyrion, maybe the first time he has scenes with Daenerys and owns up to his cynicism and says a cynic is just someone looking for something to believe in.
Right.
And I think about that with Jill, like she's desperate to believe you can be okay in this world. And so the absent, if Nora has divested herself of this gun, is a signal to her, okay, something can be corrected and made whole. And so that's why finding it shatters that illusion for her, and why she, to me, ends up at the GR, which is, we can't be okay. We're not going to be okay.
I like and will henceforth adopt your reading of that moment, because I think it's substantive. I think I agree with it. There's just too many narrative threads that reading of it makes sense. So yeah, I agree. So if that's okay with you, I think that brings us to another moment of well, ladies and gentlemen, it has been found, it has been sought for, it was missing, but now we know where it is. And I'm not quite sure what it is, but it's there, and we just talked about it. It's in The Leftovers, Season 1, Episodes 7 and 8 on this installment of #TV Guideposts. Join us next week for not only coverage of Episodes 9 and 10, but a full conversation about all of the thematic complexities of Season 1 of HBO's The Leftovers. So, okay, bye-bye. Now, talk to you then. Okay, bye.
I think we're going to...